Welcome to the deep dive. You've sent us the sources, we've done the mining, and now we're here to give you the essential knowledge you need without all the information overload.
Today, we are wading into, well, what is arguably one of the most audacious military actions the U.S. has taken in decades.
Absolutely. The capture of a sitting foreign head of state, in the middle of a tropical night,
Yeah.
it's just extraordinary.
It really is. We're talking about the U.S. military operation, codenamed Operation Absolute Resolve. This is what led to the capture of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, on Saturday, January 3rd, 2026.
And this event, it didn't just send shockwaves through global capitals.
No, it immediately forced everyone to ask these really profound questions about national sovereignty, about the limits of American power.
Exactly. So for you, we've gone through stacks of sources and we've synthesized it all into three key areas. First, we're going to look at the almost obsessive planning and the hyper-precise execution of the raid itself.
Then second, we'll get into the U.S. rationale, which, it shifted pretty quickly from narco-terrorism charges to something much more like overt regime change.
And finally, we'll cover the immediate massive global fallout and all the complex legal questions that were raised.
Right. Our mission here is to give you that critical context. We want you to understand the mechanics of the raid, the how, and then the huge geopolitical implications, separating the facts of the operation from, well, the flurry of condemnation and support that came right after.
Okay, let's unpack this, the buildup. This whole operation, it wasn't some sudden decision, was it?
Not at all. The sources make it crystal clear this was the culmination of months of rising tensions. It was a very calculated escalation.
For sure campaign, really.
Absolutely. The kinetic action, the fighting, it didn't just start on January 3rd. It started weeks, even months before, especially in the Caribbean.
You're talking about those assaults on the suspected drug vessels.
Exactly. The U.S. was hitting these vessels in the Caribbean Sea and the Eastern Pacific. This wasn't a small-scale Coast Guard action.
No, the numbers are pretty staggering. Sources confirm at least 35 alleged drug vessels were struck.
And in those operations, at least 114 people were reported killed. So this was a massive naval presence that was just slowly, methodically turning the screws.
And then the escalation moved from the sea to land, even before the final raid.
It did. And that signaled a real change in the administration's thinking. Just days before the capture, on Christmas Eve, the CIA got directly involved with a drone strike.
A Christmas Eve drone strike? What kind of signal does that send? Hitting a land target over a major holiday?
It was a warning shot, a loud one. The CIA drone hit a dock facility used by the Tren de Aragua gang. Now, U.S. officials said no casualties, but the point was made.
That the U.S. was willing to violate Venezuelan airspace and territory.
To hit targets, they linked to Maduro's network. It was the final escalation before the main event.
And all this was underpinned by intelligence gathering that, well, it borders on the obsessive.
It really does. The CIA had a small unit on the ground months earlier to get what they called extraordinary insight into Maduro's pattern of life.
The details are just incredible. They weren't just tracking his movements.
No, not at all. They knew where he lived, where he traveled, what he ate. They even knew about his pets.
Tracking his pets. Is that standard procedure for a high-value target, or does that speak to something else entirely?
Well, it shows they were leaving absolute nothing to chance. When you're planning a raid that breaks this many international norms, you need a 100% guarantee of success.
So knowing his dinner preferences helps you predict his vulnerabilities.
Exactly. You know his habits, you know his security details, patterns. It's all about eliminating variables.
And all that surveillance, it led to one final diplomatic attempt, or at least that's the White House's version.
Right. President Trump recalled offering Maduro one last chance to surrender in a private phone call about a week before the raid.
And Maduro didn't take it.
He didn't. He seemed to believe the U.S. wouldn't actually go through with it. And, well, in the president's view, that set Operation Absolute Resolve in motion.
Okay, that buildup is incredible. Let's pivot now to the raid itself, the kinetic action. How did this operation, which honestly sounds like a movie script, actually unfold?
The scale was just immense. Months of planning, rehearsals, simulations, and it utilized the full joint force. Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, even Space Force.
They really took meticulously planned to a new level.
They did. Just like with the 2011 bin Laden raid, elite troops trained for months on an exact full-size replica of Maduro's presidential compound.
I read the specific detail. They even trained with massive blowtorches.
Wait, massive blowtorches?
Yes. That's the kind of detail that just jumps out at you, right?
It is. It tells you they were planning for absolute hardcore resistance. They were ready for anything.
Exactly. They were prepared to cut through the reinforced steel walls of his safe room if they had to.
So they not only knew where he would run, but had a plan B to get through his last line of defense. Instantly.
And even the launch was delayed for days, waiting for the perfect weather.
Right? Optimal wind, optimal cloud cover. For stealth. The weather finally broke Friday night, and Trump gave the final order at 10:46 p.m. Eastern Time.
Once that green light came, the military power they unleashed was just staggering.
It was a whole joint air armada, over 150 aircraft. We're talking F-35s, F-22s, F-A-18s, B-1 bombers.
All launching from 20 different land and sea bases.
And the initial objective was defensive, in a way. They had to disable Venezuelan air defense systems to clear a path for the extraction helicopters.
And those helicopters, the detail about how they flew in.
Incredibly low. Just 100 feet above the water, using the darkness and the sea surface to evade radar for as long as possible.
The moment of truth came fast. Helicopters on the ground at 1:01 a.m. Eastern Time.
2:01 a.m. local time. And when Delta Force breached the residence, Maduro made a run for it.
For that steel safe room they'd planned for.
He did. But they were too fast. The report said they bum-rushed him so fast that he didn't get into that room.
And a firefight kicked off immediately.
An intense one.
Yeah.
U.S. forces came under fire and responded with what officials just called overwhelming force. One U.S. helicopter was hit, but it was still flyable.
U.S. officials reported several injuries, but critically, no loss of life on their side.
Right. But that's contested. A Venezuelan official, speaking anonymously, estimated at least 40 people were killed in the attacks, and that includes civilians and soldiers.
A much grimmer picture.
Much grimmer picture. The extraction itself, though, was clinical. Maduro and his wife were taken into custody by Justice Department officials, and they were over the water and out of Venezuelan airspace by 3:39 a.m. Eastern.
And then came the image, the one that went global within hours. Maduro, in a sweatsuit, blindfolded, handcuffed, aboard the USS Iwo Jima.
And from there, he was flown to New York to face those 2020 narco-terrorism charges.
Which brings us to the justification. Because the U.S. didn't just arrest a fugitive, they captured a sitting head of state.
And that's the crucial pivot. The official legal justification was all about that indictment, apprehending a leader with a $50 million reward on his head.
But if it's just law enforcement, why was the U.S. political leadership immediately talking about how they were prepared to run the country?
That is the core tension, isn't it? The political goal was explicitly broader than just an arrest.
I mean, President Trump spelled it out. He said the U.S. would run the country until a safe, proper, and judicious transition could be ensured.
That is not the language of an indictment.
No, that's the language of occupation.
And it leads us right to this new foreign policy framework they announced right after the capture, the Monroe Doctrine.
A revision of the historic Monroe Doctrine.
We really need to spend a moment on this because It's a profound shift. The original Monroe Doctrine from 1823, that was about keeping European powers out of the Americas.
Defining a sphere of influence.
Exactly. The Monroe Doctrine, though, it seems to assert the right of U.S. military and economic forces to intervene inside that sphere, unilaterally.
And the economic angle was not subtle at all. It was the foundation of the whole thing.
No, it was explicit. Trump said U.S. oil companies would go in, fix the infrastructure, and take a tremendous amount of wealth out of the ground.
To reimburse the U.S. and, supposedly, to benefit the Venezuelan people.
So it sets this new precedent. Using hard power, under the pretext of narco-terrorism, to create advantageous conditions for U.S. business. It's a very open assertion of might makes right in the hemisphere.
And historically, those kinds of interventions in Latin America, you think back to Guatemala in '54 or Chile in '73, they haven't exactly led to long-term stability.
Rarely. So post-capture, you had immediate chaos, a power vacuum. The Venezuelan Supreme Court directed Vice President Delcy Rodriguez to take over as interim president.
And she publicly rejected the whole thing, demanded proof of life, called Maduro the only legitimate president.
But what's fascinating is the conflicting messaging. Despite her public statements, Trump claimed Secretary of State Marco Rubio had spoken with her and that she was quite gracious and willing to cooperate.
So the U.S. strategy was to try and co-opt the existing structure, not just install someone new from scratch.
It seems so. Which sets the stage for the global response and, of course, the legal firestorm.
Yeah, you can't pull off something this radical without breaking a few international norms. The reaction was fierce.
It was. International law experts were almost unanimous. They argued the attack was a direct violation of the UN Charter, specifically Article 2.4.
The rule against aggression.
Essentially, yes. The prohibition on using force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. By breaching the Venezuelan capital, the U.S. effectively tore up that rulebook,
And it was widely called a crime of aggression.
which the Nuremberg court called the supreme international crime. And the U.S. attempt to frame this as self-defense against narco-terrorism, that's seen as incredibly weak under international law.
Because they'd have to prove a threat to U.S. sovereignty, not just public health.
Exactly. It's a legal bar that most analysts agree just wasn't met.
But of course, condemnation doesn't always lead to consequences, right?
Right. Because the U.S. has a veto on the UN Security Council, any kind of formal binding condemnation is, well, it's politically impossible, which basically neutralizes the main global body for accountability.
So what we're left with is this spectrum of global reaction.
And the condemnation was broad and fast. UN Secretary General Guterres called it a dangerous precedent. Russia, Iran, China, they all condemned it as a violation of sovereignty. Brazil's President Lula said it crossed an unacceptable line.
Domestically, though, it was a sharp divide.
A very sharp divide. Democrats condemned the lack of congressional authorization, calling it illegal, the actions of a rogue state.
We even saw the new mayor of New York, Zohran Mamdani, call it an act of war and speak directly to the White House about it.
Citing the impact on New York's large Venezuelan community. But on the other side, Republicans largely backed it. They hailed it as peace through strength.
Even some allies were cautiously supportive.
They were. Canada's Prime Minister welcomed the opportunity for freedom, though he did call on everyone to respect international law. And you saw celebrations among Venezuelan activists in places like Buenos Aires and Toronto.
But for foreign policy analysts, the big takeaway is the dangerous precedent this all sets.
Precisely. This action fundamentally undermines the idea of non-intervention, that states have sovereignty within their own borders. If the U.S. can do this under the pretext of an indictment, it could embolden other major powers.
You mean it creates a kind of playbook?
It creates political cover. Analysts are worried this could be used to justify, say, China moving against Taiwan by claiming it's enforcing domestic law, or Russia escalating in Ukraine using some other manufactured pretext. When the U.S. acts unilaterally like this, it creates a very unstable model for everyone else.
Okay, so to quickly recap the most striking things for you, we saw the months of CIA surveillance, down to Maduro's pets, the operational precision with the replica compound and those massive blowtorches.
The official launch of the Donroe Doctrine, tying hard power directly to U.S. business interests, and the immediate, profound geopolitical rift that this action has just carved across the globe.
We've covered the capture, but the reality now is the power vacuum, the instability. The U.S. arrested a leader and now says it intends to effectively run an oil-rich nation of 28 million people.
It's an unprecedented commitment in the hemisphere. The execution of the raid was, by all military accounts, flawless.
Yeah.
But the true test of this operation was never the extraction itself.
Right. So given the history of U.S.-led regime change in Latin America, we mentioned Guatemala, Chile, which so often results in instability and blowback, how might this Donroe Doctrine redefine America's role, not just in the hemisphere, but globally? The capture is done. The true test is what happens on day 2, day 3, and beyond. Something for you to mull over until our next deep dive.